Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into something I know a lot of you are dealing with, the ups and downs of learning English.
For sure.
And to help us with this, we've got this great conversation between Ali, who is learning English himself, and Sarah, who is like this, veteran English teacher.
Right.
Oh, it should be a lot of fun to dissect their conversation.
Yeah, it's a really good conversation. It really kind of highlights like those aha moments that I think are really helpful for people who are learning English.
Yeah, and like right away, Ali jumps into one of the biggest things for English learners, which is pronunciation.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he's like completely perplexed by words like, though, through, and thought.
Yeah.
And how they look so similar but sound so different. And even for me, I always kind of wondered about that. Like, why does English have so many like irregular pronunciations?
Yeah, I think part of it is that English has borrowed so many words from other languages over the years, right? So you've got all these different influences kind of smushed together into this one language, and it makes for like a really rich vocabulary, but it also makes for a lot of weird pronunciations.
I guess that's why when I try to speak French, it ends up sounding more like, bad English than actual French.
Exactly. And it's not just individual sounds either, right? You also have to think about things like homographs, words that are spelled the same but pronounced differently, like lead the metal versus lead, as in to guide someone.
Oh yeah, the old lead dilemma.
Right.
That is one that can get you for sure. What would using like the International Phonetic Alphabet or IPA help with that at all?
I mean, it can be useful, especially for understanding like the nuances of different sounds. But for someone who's just starting out, it might feel like you're learning a whole new language just to learn English.
Right. It's like, why am I doing this to myself? So maybe something for later down the line.
Yeah, when you're a bit more advanced.
So moving on from pronunciation, Ali also expressed a lot of frustration with English grammar.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, who can blame him? It's like a total beast.
Oh, absolutely.
He was especially having trouble with the present perfect tense.
Right.
Like I have eaten versus I ate.
Right.
For a non-native English speaker, that can seem completely interchangeable.
Yeah, and Sarah explains it really well in the conversation. She's basically saying that the present perfect, like I have eaten, it links the action to the present. Uh-huh. Whereas a simple past, I ate, it's purely about a finished action.
I remember that being something that really tripped me up too. But I mean, even then, isn't it still kind of confusing when the present perfect can also sometimes describe a finished action?
Yeah, it can get a little tricky, right? There are definitely like nuances and exceptions to the rules. So that's where I guess understanding like the context and the speaker's intention becomes really important.
Yeah, context is key, and that's something that actually leads really well into what Ali said next, which was about phrasal verbs.
Okay.
He brought up give up as a prime example of how direct translation just doesn't work with phrasal verbs.
Right. Yeah, and they're so common in English.
Oh yeah.
So it's something that trips up a lot of learners, but like you were saying about context, a lot of times you can actually kind of guess the meaning by looking at the individual words that make up the phrasal verb, like give up. You're literally giving something up.
That is actually really helpful. I never thought of it that way. It's like a little puzzle you can try to figure out. Yeah,
exactly. And the more you kind of see those phrasal verbs in context, the more you'll start to recognize the patterns and understand the nuance.
So speaking of feeling lost, Ali also brought up the challenge of understanding like fast speech,
Mm-hmm.
When native speakers are talking, it can sometimes sound like they're rapping.
Yeah, it can be intimidating.
So what can you do about that? Is it just something you have to get used to?
Well, I mean, Sarah had some good advice in the conversation.
Okay.
She recommended starting with like slower audio. Like maybe podcasts that are specifically designed for English language learners.
Oh.
And then gradually increase the speed as you get more comfortable.
So like start with the slow jam and then work your way up to like, hip hop speed.
Exactly.
That's great.
And she also talked about using subtitles when you're watching movies or TV shows.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's like having a built-in decoder,
Yeah.
You can see the words as you're hearing them, so it helps you make those connections.
Yeah, I used to think that subtitles were cheating, but now I realize it's actually a really great way to connect like the spoken word with the written word.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered pronunciation, grammar, phrasal verbs, and listening so far.
Right.
Now let's jump into the vocabulary vortex.
Okay.
Ali felt totally overwhelmed by the sheer number of English words.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's like trying to drink from a firehouse, right?
Right. Totally. And it's true, the English language is massive.
Yeah.
It's got over 1 million words, but the good news is that you don't need to know every single one to be able to communicate.
That does make me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
But how do you even begin to tackle such a big vocabulary? I mean, where do you even start?
Well, Sarah suggested breaking down words into their root, their prefixes and suffixes, and this can help you unlock the meaning of words that you don't know, and it can really help you expand your vocabulary pretty quickly.
So like if you know that the prefix pre means before, then you could figure out that prehistoric means before recorded history.
Exactly. It's like having a secret decoder ring for the English language.
I love that.
Right? And learning synonyms and antonyms can also be helpful. Not only does it expand your vocabulary, but it also like deepens your understanding of word relationships.
So instead of just learning the word happy, you might also learn words like joyful, cheerful, and delighted, and then also sad, gloomy, and depressed.
Right.
And that gives you a much deeper, richer understanding of happiness itself.
Exactly. It's about building a nuanced vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
One that allows you to really express yourself with precision.
Okay, so now we've got to move on to something that I know trips up a lot of English language learners, and that is idioms.
Oh, yeah.
Ollie was totally baffled by phrases like kick the bucket and let the cat out of the bag. They don't make any sense if you try to translate them literally.
Right. And that's what makes them so tricky, is that they rely on this cultural context and figurative language.
Right.
You know, it's like they're like little stories that are kind of embedded in the language.
So how can learners get their heads around these weird expressions?
Well, I think the key is to understand the imagery and the cultural context behind the idiom. So, for example, like kick the bucket, you know, that likely came from the way that pigs would twitch their legs after they were slaughtered. So it's not literally about kicking a bucket. It's a metaphorical way of describing death.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
So it's really like a window into the history and the culture of the language.
Exactly. And the more you understand those stories behind the idioms, the easier it is to remember them and to use them correctly.
So it's all about context again, right?
Okay.
Like we were talking about with the phrasal verbs, it's about seeing the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've tackled pronunciation, grammar, phrasal verbs, vocabulary, and idioms. But what about the actual act of writing in English?
Yeah, writing is a whole other ball game, right? It requires not only a good grasp of the vocabulary and the grammar, but it also takes that ability to organize your thoughts in a really clear and coherent way.
Yeah, and that's something that Ollie struggled with.
Yeah.
He felt like he could understand spoken English pretty well,
Yeah.
but when it came to writing, his thoughts just wouldn't flow onto the page.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common challenge, right? Writing takes a different set of skills, and it can take time and practice to really develop those.
So what did Sarah have to say about that?
Well, she emphasized the importance of structure and coherence in writing. You know, start by outlining your ideas, use clear topic sentences, and make sure that your paragraphs flow smoothly from one to the next.
So it's like building a house.
Yeah.
You need a strong foundation and a good structure to be able to create a solid finished product.
Exactly.
Okay. And just like with anything, practice make perfect.
Oh, absolutely.
The more you write, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
Right. And don't be afraid to experiment with different writing styles, different genres. You know, the more you kind of play around with it, the more you'll discover your own voice.
And speaking of finding your voice, Ali also brought up this fear that so many language learners have, you know, and that is the fear of never actually achieving fluency. It can feel like this elusive goal that's always just out of reach.
Yeah, and it's a valid concern, right? I think it's important to remember that fluency isn't a destination, it's a journey. You know, there are going to be ups and downs, there are going to be times when you're frustrated, and there are going to be times when you feel like you're making a lot of progress.
It's like climbing a mountain. You wouldn't expect to reach the summit without any training or preparation.
Yeah, you're going to have to put in the work.
Yeah, you're not just going to magically appear at the top.
Exactly.
And language learning is similar. It takes time, it takes effort, and it definitely takes dedication.
And as Sarah said, it's so important to celebrate the little wins along the way. You know, don't focus on being perfect. Focus on making progress and acknowledge your achievements, no matter how small they might seem.
Yeah, so instead of beating yourself up for not being fluent yet, maybe you should focus on the fact that you can now, you know, hold a basic conversation or read a simple article, or you can write, a short email in English. And those are all huge accomplishments.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. There are so many resources available to help you, like online courses and language exchange programs, and even just supportive communities of other learners who are going through the same thing that you are.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things is to find ways to make language learning fun and enjoyable. Engage with content that you're interested in, whether it's books, movies, music, podcasts, or even video games.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The more you enjoy it, the more likely you are to keep going.
Absolutely. Learning a language shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be an adventure.
Right.
It should be something that opens up a whole new world of possibilities for you.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here, from pronunciation pitfalls to the nuances of idioms. We've explored some of the biggest challenges and most effective strategies for mastering the English language.
Yeah, and we've learned that while it can be challenging, it's also incredibly rewarding. And with persistence, the right mindset, and a healthy dose of curiosity, anyone can conquer this linguistic beast.
We'll be right back after a short break to dig even deeper into some specific tips and tricks for tackling these challenges head on, so stay tuned. So before the break, we were talking about some of the big challenges that come up when you're learning English, from Ali's conversation with Sarah.
Right.
And now I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some more practical tactics for actually overcoming those hurdles.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And, Sarah actually had some really great suggestions.
Okay, so let's start with pronunciation, that pronunciation puzzle we were talking about. I remember Sarah mentioning that paying attention to like the actual phonetic sounds of English can really be a game changer.
Yeah, for sure.
And she brought up this tool that can be really helpful, which is the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA for short.
Yeah.
And it's basically like this standardized way to represent sounds no matter the language.
Right. Exactly. So it's like a universal code for understanding how to make those tricky English sounds.
I can see how that would be really useful, but isn't that a bit much for like a beginner? I mean, could it be kind of overwhelming?
I mean, it might be. Yeah, it might be better to wait until you've got like a basic understanding of English sounds.
Okay.
But for those who like to really dig deep into the linguistics of it all, I mean, it can be fascinating.
I'll admit, I'm kind of intrigued by it, but let's be real. Sometimes the best way to learn pronunciation is just to mimic, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like listen to native speakers and try to copy their sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't be shy about recording yourself, You can listen back to it and really pinpoint the areas where you need to focus.
That is a great tip. I might have to try that myself. It's like having your own little pronunciation coach, but without the awkward staring.
Right, exactly.
And remember what we were talking about with accents.
Yeah.
It's really good to expose yourself to different ways that English is spoken around the world.
For sure.
That'll not only help you with pronunciation, but also just understanding the cultural nuances of how people speak English.
Right.
So watching British period dramas is educational.
Yeah, there you go.
Seriously, though. I mean, watching movies and TV shows from different English-speaking countries, listening to podcasts with diverse hosts.
Yeah.
It's like building this mental map of all the different sounds of English.
Yeah. The more you hear, the better you'll be able to navigate those differences.
Okay, let's move on to this beast that we call English grammar.
Okay.
I know so many learners, and myself included, get really intimidated by it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like a maze sometimes.
It can be daunting, but I think the key is to approach it systematically.
Okay.
Start with the foundations, like subject-verb agreement, basic tenses, sentence structure. Don't try to tackle it all at once.
Yeah, it's like learning an instrument. You wouldn't start with Rachmaninoff, right?
No.
You'd start with, scales and simple melodies.
Exactly. And just like with music, as you master those basics, then you can move on to the more complex pieces.
And speaking of complexity, let's revisit those tricky phrasal verbs that we were talking about.
Okay.
I remember you were saying that context is so important for understanding them.
Absolutely. Don't just try to memorize lists of phrasal verbs. That's not going to get you very far. Instead, try to immerse yourself in real English content, like books, movies, podcasts, conversations with native speakers.
So you can actually see how those phrasal verbs are being used in real life situations.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess it's kind of like learning slang.
Yeah.
You really have to hear it in context to understand how it's used.
Right, exactly. And the more you encounter those phrasal verbs in context, the easier it will be to recognize those patterns and understand like the nuances of their meaning.
So we've tackled pronunciation, grammar, phrasal verbs. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is vocabulary. English has so many words. It can feel almost impossible to keep up.
It's true. It has a massive vocabulary, but the good news is you don't need to know every single word to be fluent.
Okay, that is a relief.
Right.
But how do you choose which words to focus on? I mean, it can feel so overwhelming.
Well, Sarah had some good advice about that.
Okay.
She suggested focusing on words that are relevant to your interests and goals.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you're really passionate about cooking, you might prioritize learning culinary terms,
That makes a lot of sense. It's about making that vocabulary learning meaningful.
Yeah.
And relevant to your life. And what about those tricky words that have like a million different meanings?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think the word run has like a million different definitions.
It does. And that's one of the beauties and challenges of English is that words can have so many different meanings.
Yeah.
But context is your friend here.
Okay.
You can look at how the word is being used in a sentence, and that can really help you figure out its intended meaning.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Context is everything.
Yeah, it really is.
Whether it's pronunciation, phrasal verbs, vocabulary, understanding the context is key. And speaking of context, let's jump back into those idioms for a second.
Okay.
We were talking about how they're like little stories embedded in the language.
Right.
And just like any good story, understanding the characters and the setting is crucial for unlocking the meaning.
Absolutely. It's like having that background information that helps you understand what's really going on.
So, for example, if someone says, "Don't cry over spilled milk," it's not actually about milk, right? It's a metaphor for letting go of things that you can't change.
Right, exactly. It's about understanding that underlying message and the cultural context that shapes those expressions.
I love how idioms add like color and personality to the language.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I've got to admit, they could be a little bit of a head scratcher sometimes.
They can be.
So what are some tips for deciphering these linguistic puzzles?
Well, one strategy that I like to use is to try to visualize like the literal meaning of the idiom.
Okay.
And then try to connect that to the figurative meaning. So, for example, bite off more than you can chew. Literally, that means trying to eat a piece of food that's too big for your mouth, right?
Right.
But figuratively, it means taking on more than you can handle.
I get it.
Right.
So it's about making that connection between the literal and the figurative meaning.
Exactly. And the more you expose yourself to those idioms, the more familiar they'll become.
Okay, so we've covered pronunciation, grammar, phrasal verbs, vocabulary, and idioms.
Right.
Now let's move on to another crucial aspect of language learning, which is listening comprehension.
Okay.
I remember Ali being really frustrated with understanding fast-talking native speakers.
Yeah, it can feel like they're speaking a different language.
Oh, for sure.
Especially for beginners.
So what are some strategies for training your ears to keep up with the speed of like natural conversation?
Well, I think one good strategy is to start with slower audio, like podcasts designed for English language learners. And then you can gradually increase the speed as you become more comfortable.
It's like starting with a light jog before you try to run a marathon, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and what about those moments where you just can't catch a word?
Well, don't be afraid to ask native speakers to slow down or repeat themselves,
Okay.
Most people are pretty happy to accommodate learners.
That's good to know.
And sometimes technology can be a lifesaver. A lot of audio and video platforms have speed controls.
Right.
So you can slow down the playback if you need to.
And don't forget about subtitles.
Oh yeah, subtitles are great.
They can really help you connect the spoken word with the written word.
For sure.
Especially for learners.
Yeah.
So it's like having a built-in transcript of the conversation. So subtitles are a learning tool, not a crutch.
Exactly.
I'm using that excuse next time someone judges me for watching Netflix with subtitles.
Absolutely.
Okay. Speaking of valuable resources, let's talk about writing.
Okay.
I know Oli was really struggling to express his thoughts clearly in written English.
Yeah. And that's something that a lot of learners find challenging.
Yeah, it can feel so different from spoken English.
Oh, for sure.
Like the rules and expectations kind of change when you put pen to paper.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or fingers to keyboard, I guess, in this day and age.
Right. Yeah. Writing takes a different approach. It's about clarity. It's about structure. It's about coherence.
Yeah. And Sarah had some great tips for improving writing skills. She really emphasized planning and outlining your ideas before you actually start writing.
Yeah. It's like creating a roadmap.
Yeah.
So you don't get lost along the way.
And she also suggested breaking down writing into smaller chunks.
Right.
So instead of trying to, write a 5-page essay all at once, start with a paragraph or two.
Yeah. It's a good way to build confidence and momentum.
And don't be afraid to ask for feedback from native speakers.
Oh, absolutely.
Or language teachers.
Yeah, give feedback whenever you can.
Because they can offer some really good insights and help you refine your writing style.
For sure, it's like having a personal editor.
I love that.
Right.
On call.
So we've covered pronunciation, grammar, phrasal verbs, vocabulary, idioms, listening comprehension, and writing.
Wow.
That is a lot, but I think it's really important to address the emotional side of language learning too.
Yeah, for sure.
We talked about Ali's fear of never achieving fluency.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that we all struggle with at some point.
Yeah, it's a natural fear, and it's good to acknowledge it.
Right.
Learning a new language is a roller coaster. There are going to be highs and lows. There are going to be times when you feel really confident, and there are going to be times when you really doubt yourself. It's like anything worthwhile in life. Really, there are going to be challenges and setbacks, but the important thing is to keep going.
Yeah.
And to celebrate the small victories and just remember why you started this journey in the first place.
Absolutely. And it's so important to be kind to yourself. Don't compare your progress to other people's progress.
Right.
Everyone learns at their own pace.
Yeah.
And there's no right or wrong way to do it.
I love that reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to others, especially with social media.
Oh, for sure.
Everyone's posting their highlight reels and it's easy to feel like you're not measuring up.
Yeah, but you have to remember that everyone's journey is unique.
Right.
And what works for one person might not work for another.
Right. The key is to find what works for you.
Yeah.
To focus on your own progress.
And remember, fluency is not a destination. It's a journey. It's about constantly learning, growing,
right,
expanding your linguistic horizons.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From practical tips for improving pronunciation to strategies for overcoming the fear of fluency.
Yeah.
We've explored a wide range of challenges and solutions for mastering the English language.
And we've learned that while it can be challenging, it's super rewarding.
Right.
And with persistence, the right mindset, and a healthy dose of curiosity, anyone can conquer this linguistic beast.
Okay, and speaking of conquering beasts, I think it's time for us to wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts and some insights, so stick around. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into learning English. And we've talked about a lot of the challenges that learners face and some strategies for overcoming them. But now I'm curious, like what are the big takeaways here for our listeners?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've covered so much, but it still feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
I mean, English is so vast and it's constantly changing and evolving.
It really is. It's like this living, breathing entity that just adapts and changes with the times.
Exactly. But even with all of its complexity, I think the heart of the matter, and this is something that came up in Ollie and Sarah's conversation, is that learning English is a journey worth taking.
For sure. It's a journey with challenges, but the rewards are just incredible. I mean, it opens up so many doors, not just for communication, but for understanding different cultures, different perspectives, even different ways of thinking.
Yeah, it's like gaining a whole new lens through which to see the world.
I love that. And thinking back on everything we've discussed, one thing that really stands out to me is the importance of context.
Yeah.
Context is everywhere.
Whether you're trying to figure out pronunciation or understand phrasal verbs or grasp the meaning of an idiom, context is key.
Absolutely. It's like having a secret decoder ring for the language.
Yeah.
When you understand the context, all the pieces just start falling into place. And another big takeaway, I think, is just the importance of being patient with yourself and being kind to yourself. I mean, learning a language takes time. It takes effort.
For sure.
There will be moments of frustration.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so crucial to celebrate those small victories and just remember why you started this journey in the first place.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to other people, especially these days with social media. You
Right.
know, everyone's posting their highlight reels, and
Yeah.
it's easy to feel like you're not measuring up.
Right.
But language learning is not a sprint, it's a marathon.
That's a great analogy.
You know, it's about focusing on your own progress,
Yeah.
not on someone else's finish line.
Right. And finding joy in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, learning a language shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be an adventure.
Absolutely.
A chance to explore new worlds and expand your horizons.
It really should be.
And speaking of exploration, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive with a little challenge for our listeners.
Okay, I like it.
We've talked about so many fascinating aspects of the English language, but now we want to hear from you.
Yes, tell us, what is your favorite English word or phrase and why?
We would love for you to share your thoughts with us on social media. Tell us what words or phrases spark joy for you.
Yeah.
What linguistic discoveries have surprised you? What parts of the language still intrigue you?
Let's keep this conversation going and continue to learn from each other.
So until next time, fellow language enthusiasts, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep embracing the beauty and the power of the English language.